start off thanking you for reintroducing me to the soundtrack of Midnight Cowboy.
Oh,
That was a whole week listening to that, so that was good.
wait, how did I do that?
With the John Barry article.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh,
And
well,
I had
thank
no-
you.
I had no idea
Wow,
who-
you did your research.
Yeah.
That's such an amazing, amazing soundtrack.
I had no idea who he was, and you've written about film composers and the history of Stewardess and Amy Schumer. So how do you come up with a story, and how do you know when a story is worth writing throughout?
Well, it's a funny question because sometimes you don't really till you really start getting into it. But I guess, like all those stories you mentioned, they were things that just interested in me, and I guess I was lucky enough or arrogant enough to think, oh, it'll be interesting to other people. John Barry I was interested in because I grew up, my parents had the soundtrack of Midnight Cowboy, so I grew up listening to it, and I always loved that music. And he obviously had, he did the James Bond theme, and he composed scores for Out of Africa and Dances with Wolves. So it was obviously a big career. So there was a lot to talk about with him. But it came out of this kind of kernel of interest that went back to my childhood. With Amy Schumer, I was just like a fan of hers. I think her comedy is so smart, and I thought her show was so smart. I was eager to talk to her and find out how she does what she does, and how she thinks about comedy and how she produces and writes her show. So that was fun. But again, she's obviously very interesting. So I thought, well, there's her comedy is interesting enough. There's going to be a lot more there to talk about with her, and happily there was.
And how is it different to write something that you follow with your own interests, something that you got from childhood, to writing a story that Vanity Fair or the Hollywood Reporter asks you to write? Mm-hmm. Like, for example, the Star Wars, The Force Awakens. Uh-huh. I read it when it came out, and I had no idea it was you. So I'm sure you're a fan for writing it. Yeah. What's the difference between writing those stories and the ones that you actually have as your own idea?
Well, I guess sometimes sometimes, and again with this, since I was a fan of Star Wars, I start out with a built-in interest. But sometimes, if it's an assignment that comes to me, sometimes it's more about kind of finding my way into it. Definitely I take things for for work because it's a job, and I'm not going to turn down work if somebody comes to me with an assignment. But maybe a good example for me is I did a story for Vanity Fair about there was a big controversy in America where British expatriates, British people living in the United States had been importing Cadbury's chocolate for years because it's something they're just they love from their homeland, and they're very passionate about. And then there was kind of a fight going. There was kind of a trade war thing going on for a while because Hershey's, an American chocolate company, owns the right to make Cadbury chocolate in the U.S. under the Cadbury label, but it's not the same. It's not the same thing. So these British people have been bringing in the real thing from the U.K. for years. Suddenly, Hershey's was trying to stop them, and so there was kind of a big stink about that. And so Vanity Fair assigned me a story on that, and it wasn't it wasn't my idea. And I was like, I don't know British chocolate. I'm not a big super chocolate fan. I like it as much as anybody, but. Yeah, when I started talking to the people, I got really interested in it because it became, so much about, it was about something that was important to them from their childhood. It was a way for them to keep, in touch with their native country. I got interested in it because of how important it was to them. This thing that seems, maybe kind of trivial, but in fact to them it was, it was kind of a big deal, and it was a interesting cultural issue. So it was kind of, I guess, about finding my way into that. So there's always usually, when you start working on a story and start reporting it, you start to find out, where the real story is, or where's the real heart of it. There's almost usually there's some kind of a sort of a beating, heart to a long form journalism story. And sometimes that's partly something I have that beating heart myself. Not to belabor the metaphor, and sometimes I kind of find it elsewhere.
And these are stories that probably you wouldn't have come up with yourself if you were just looking for your interest. So that's nice. And I've read in an interview about your new book, Wild Things. Mm-hmm. You found an old high school paper that you had wrote about Crime and Punishment, the Dostoevsky novel.
Yeah.
and the teacher asked you, what did you learn from this? And you said, I learned that I would much rather have read the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book. So is that something that you've always been interested in, even after you moved on to high school, children's literature?
Well, it's funny because that was kind of a discovery I made about myself. I found that high school paper because my mom, recently sold the house that I grew up in as a kid. So we was going through it and throwing things out and whatnot as you do. And I found this box of old high school papers, and I saw that. And it was kind of like, oh wow! I was interested in this in high school. I didn't realize. I thought it was something, the book Wild Things started for me when I had children and started reading to them and rediscovered all these books. So I thought it was I thought children's literature was kind of a recent enthusiasm for me. But I guess I was surprised to learn that wasn't the case. It's funny when you, I guess you live long enough and you start where your past can start surprising you. You forget things.
And did you learn anything as a writer by revisiting those children's books?
Oh, as a writer myself?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I think, certainly with especially with picture books and books for the very young. I mean, they're very, the writing in them is so refined. I mean, every, in a book like, Goodnight Moon or The Very Hungry Caterpillar, or even in, Dr. Seuss, which are, kind of for slightly older kids, and there's more text, but there's still, every word is so important in those things. So I think, and you can't waste a word in that. It's like, so in some ways, the picture book text is almost like poetry, I think. So I think I've always, hopefully I've always, as a writer, I've always been aware that every word is important, and you don't want words that are waste. You don't want to throw in words that you don't need, or you don't. Precision is obviously important as a writer, but I think, one doesn't always, sometimes you forget those kind of things. So it was nice, I think, plunging back into that, reminded me again of just how, really just, you have to really hone your prose and really, really be kind of ruthless sometimes
you have no
as a writer.
excuse as a children's writer to keep other words in.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot about, in your book, about the Freudian concepts that you end up finding in these books, and Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, and how children, the parents are always out of the house, normally out of the house in those children's books. And you mentioned your work with therapy, and I wanted to ask you if therapy has had any part in your evolution as a writer in your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, one, it's made me more productive as a writer. Yeah. I think I procrastinate. I mean, all writers procrastinate, and I procrastinate, but I think I definitely procrastinate less than I maybe did earlier in my career, and I think therapy certainly helped me with that. But yeah, I think I really believe, this has been true for me, and it's been true for a lot of people I know. I mean, I'm a big believer in therapy. It's helped me immensely. But I think it's also in terms of, I feel for me, as I've gotten to understand myself better and figure myself out, I think it's also helped me understand other people better. I think it's I think I'm just more, maybe more psychologically perceptive, having been in therapy than I was before. So that's important as a writer, both when you're talking to people and trying to figure them out, and like for instance, if you're writing a profile, part of that is trying to figure somebody out. I mean, I don't mean to say that you want to necessarily do what people always call armchair psychoanalysis of a subject or something like that. I mean, that's you don't. Yeah. It's not like you really know these people intimately, but I do think having I do think being psychologically aware and is informed my writing, for sure. I think it's just it's made me a better observer, and I think a better thinker about people, and maybe why people do what they do. I think it helps too. Maybe helps me maybe ask better questions. I think hopefully. That's good. Because I've been sitting there, your therapist is always asking you, asking one question, so you learn to absorb some of that from your therapist and turn it on other people too, maybe. And the book that in the end you almost end with a question.
with that story that you were reading a book to your child and he fell asleep.
Yeah.
And you continued reading it to yourself while he fell asleep. So who do they write these books to?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think the opening, the epigraph of my book is a quote about something from Samuel Johnson, I think, saying, that, it's the parents who buy the books, basically. And I think that's true. I think, certainly my kids would say, I think sometimes that they thought I was reading more from, when I was reading to them, I was really reading more, for myself than for them. They would sort of say that they sometimes kind of tolerated the books that I wanted to hear. Although I sometimes, there were plenty of books they liked that I couldn't stand that I would of course read to them too. So it was a two-way street. But I'm not sure, did I answer your question exactly?
No, it's just, yeah, you did. It's just, I found it interesting that many of these writers, they ended up never having children.
Yeah.
And almost many of them didn't like children.
Yeah.
And so does that show some form of respect to seeing children as readers, as an actual audience?
Well, I think absolutely. I think you're 100% right there. And I think it also shows that a lot of these writers, they somehow, a lot of these people, they somehow, some of them came to writing to children, relatively late in their careers too, like Dr. Seuss. I think probably for a lot of artists, sometimes, it's a struggle to find what exactly is the medium that works best for me. Maybe sometimes people start out as poets and then maybe start writing prose, or some people, vice versa, or some people work in, in different media. And I think for some of these people, they, for whatever reason, writing for children, that was just the best way they could, that was the truest way they could express themselves, like any artist. I think in a way that's, I think the fact that a lot of these writers were childless, I mean, certainly you can, plenty of parents wrote great children's books too. It's not like you have to be childless, but I think it does speak to that. In a lot of cases, these people were saying something that was important to them, the way any artist does, and the medium that they chose that worked best for them was children's books. But I think that's why these works endure, because they, in some sense, they needed to be, written. It was true self-expression.
Mm-hmm. And there's a quote that I liked in your book that I skimmed through, and I had to skim again because I identified with it a lot. When you talk about Maurice Sendak and how you didn't like the book at first, but the book had a little star in it that said it was a best-selling classic book. And you said that as a kid, you were a child with an unhealthy interest in consensus.
Yeah.
That's such a marvelous, beautiful saying. Like, it's just, where did this come from? Like, how did this end up shaping your interest?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I was a follower. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I was aware of stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. It's always, maybe that's how you start being a journalist. I mean, it's funny, you talked about John Barry, but yeah, the only reason I really knew who he was when I was a kid was because, my parents had the Midnight Cowboy record album, and I would sit there and stare at the back of the thing. I was interested in who wrote the songs or who produced it. So, and then I saw the name, John Barry, and then later when I saw a James Bond movie, I saw his name in the credits. So I knew it. I guess, I don't know, it was sort of a weird, nerdy, kid or something. I just, that kind of stuff, that stuff that interested me. I always wanted to know where things, fit in relationship to each other in some ways, maybe that's sort of part of it. I wanted to know, is this important? Is this something I need to know about or not? Hopefully maybe I place less, maybe I have a little more healthy skepticism about
Gold stars.
Awards and gold stars, yes, as an adult than maybe I did as a kid. Although I guess, as a kid I knew, I saw the gold sticker, but I didn't force myself to like the book. So I guess, okay, I wasn't a total sheep, I guess.
And you ended up rereading the book with your children.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. When 40 years later, when I was an adult and my wife and I had kids and people gave us books, somebody gave us Where the Wild Things Are, and then when I looked at it for the first time since I was a little kid and I didn't like it, suddenly I did like it. And then, again, that's partly going back to, therapy and whatnot, because it's, it's a very psychologically tinged book. It's kind of a fairy tale, but it's sort of a Freudian or post-Freudian fairy tale or something. It's about, this, the boy Max and his anger and his kind of his fears about his anger, and His fears about his anger at his mother, but then he kind of, when he goes to the land of the wild things, he sort of tames them, and it's this kind of psychological metaphor, I think, about overcoming your anger, or learning that it's that it's okay and being comfortable with that. So all that stuff I saw in it as an adult, which I didn't see it as a kid, and then suddenly I thought it was it was incredibly artful and kind of profound in its way, and so then. So suddenly I loved it. Then I tried to read it to my kids, and they didn't like it either. So that was literally, I wrote an essay about that, and that was really the germ for my book.
That's how it began.
Was that exact experience.
I'm glad we came full circle. So thank you very much for doing this, Bruce.
Oh, thank you. It was totally my pleasure. Great questions.
Great talking to you.